Welcome back, fellow internet adventurers. Get ready for another wild ride through Reddit's strangest stories. We're diving deep into the internet's quirkiest corners. Grab your popcorn and join us on this adventure. Don't forget to hit subscribe and like. Let's get started. Ralph looked up into her eyes. She was wild with passion, her movements almost maniacal as she moved in deep, practiced strokes up and down the length of him. Over and over, she rose up and then slammed down, burying him deep inside her wonderfully muscled body. Her tightness and warmth were amazing as he lost track of all other sensory input. She wore a sinister smile as she controlled both of their pleasure, forcing him to just lay back and accept the pounding she was happily administering to him. Ralph was in heaven. It had been 9 or 10 months since he had gotten anything but a cursory quickie from her. Her head suddenly flipped backward, her wet hair moving in a seductive dance of desire. She moaned loudly as her body convulsed with spasms deep inside her. She hardly noticed when, a few seconds later, he pushed upwards with all his strength, burying himself deep inside her as he released his essence of life at the entrance to her womb. Exhausted, Callista collapsed onto Ralph. "My gosh, Ralphie, that was amazing. That was probably the best you've ever done for me. You could be a really good lover when you want to be." Her tone was belittling and cold, like an angry dog owner responding to his pet after it finally learns a new trick. Kissing him on the lips like an adult with a child, she smiled at him, though her expression seemed almost sad or melancholy. She sighed and got out of bed, heading toward the bathroom. Ralph watched his wife of 5 years walk away, her lively, sensual sway reminding him of when they first met in college, when she was a swimmer for their university. No matter what, he thought to himself, she has just got to be a witch about it. Damn it, how can someone who looks and pleasures the way she does, and that I have loved so much, have such a piss-poor personality? Shaking his head, he got up off the bed as soon as he heard the shower start to flow. Sitting on the toilet, he contemplated her weird mood swings. Just then, the shower curtain was pushed aside as Callista looked at him. "You startled me," he said sheepishly. She shook her head and then shrugged as she dropped an expended container of disposable D in the trash can in front of him. He glanced at her with confusion painted on his face, wondering why she was doing that. She never cleaned herself out after they made love. She had always said she liked to feel and smell of him on her and in her afterwards. Callista, looking at him almost as if she could read his question, shook her head. Letting her hair move around her face in a wild, untamed look, she said, "This is a new day, and I want to be fresh and new everywhere," in a sarcastic tone. Before Ralph could say anything else, she closed the shower curtain and began to wash her long, auburn hair. Finishing her shower, they exchanged places with a minimum of conversation. He washed himself off, lost in the emotional turmoil of the past 18 months and the understanding that nothing Callista had done during that time was as it appeared. He remembered coming home early from work almost 18 months ago and finding Callista and her personal trainer, a huge, muscle-bound Norwegian gorilla, in the throes of passion. The big guy was pumping in and out of her like a piston in a dragster. She was screaming in a way she never did when she was with him, and it made him feel physically sick. He had nearly left and considered harming himself after finding them together, but after some serious thinking, he decided to try to save his marriage instead. He had never experienced such emotional pain in his entire life. He thought he had managed to discover them without being seen, but when he returned home an hour later, Callista was crying on the couch, still wearing the same housecoat. She ran over to him and hugged him tightly, crying as she said, "I never meant for him to see what happened today. It was the first time. Wine has been pursuing me for almost 7 months, and I finally gave in. Please forgive me. It will never happen again." She looked and acted so sincere and apologized for hours and days afterward. She changed her health club, and Ralph watched as she slapped the freak of nature while storming out of the old health club. He realized that her attitude, in spite of her Academy Award-winning performance, was in a downward spiral from that point to this day. How is it a man can love a woman so completely for 6 years, and yet she is capable of gutting him like a deer? Of course, many guys can be just as heartless, he reckoned. He knew within weeks that she had not ended the affair, but she now had a great deal of trouble concealing it much better. He tried to act as if he knew nothing. Maybe she would change her mind or come to her senses or something. However, all his inactivity did was make her more self-assured and arrogant as she reveled in his apparent ignorance of her affair. Now he was torn as he struggled with his desire to have his loving wife back, or if she had really ever loved him in the first place. He knew he had had enough pain to last a lifetime and really didn't want any more. Callista had even used her younger sister, Stephanie, to be a moderator between the two of them for the last 14 months. Yeah, that was a big help. Stephanie came over and talked and interacted with him for 4 hours twice a week. At first, Ralph had thought it was to work things out, but one night Stephanie and he had followed Callista and found out she would go to Bjorn's house for some personal fitness training. He made sure that he had cleaned himself off thoroughly before exiting the shower, wearing a towel. Callista was standing in their bedroom, made up to the hilt. She was wearing a sizzling hot little black cocktail dress that showed off her cleavage as well as much more of her toned legs than he wanted anyone but him to see. "Where did you get that dress from?" he gulped. She twirled, and he saw she had on a tiny black thong. The dress would never be able to conceal her bare cheeks when she sat down. "Oh, Ralphie, I bought this especially for the occasion, for this very special day." The smile in her voice was almost louder than the smile on her face. The way she moved in the stiletto heels was almost hypnotic, the upward thrust of the heels showing off her toned, muscled legs, leaving him helpless to do anything but watch her as he always had when she dressed this way. Callista seductively wrapped her arms around his neck, just as his towel almost fell off. He grabbed the towel with both hands as she removed one of her hands and brushed the new tent pole he was hiding under the towel, kissing him lightly on the lips and then on both cheeks. Her hand, almost as if it had a mind of its own, continued to tease his fully erect manhood as she whispered, "After 5 years of marriage and almost 6.5 years together, the way you made love to me today was almost enough to make me sad that was the last time you'll ever touch me. But such is life." Her smile seemed almost evil as she suddenly spun around, letting go of him. Her hair flew wildly around her face as she rushed out of the bedroom and downstairs. Ralph was completely shocked by what he had just heard. Clutching his towel, he dashed out of the bedroom, calling after Callista, demanding to know what she meant. He hurried down the stairs, but when his still damp feet hit the tile floor, he slipped and fell hard, landing barefoot and sliding on the cold tile. As he looked up, still dazed from his fall, he was surprised to see his wife in the arms of Bjorn, her muscular Norwegian fitness instructor whom he had despised for nearly a year and a half. Callista glared down at Ralph, clearly disgusted. "You always find a way to embarrass yourself. And me too," she said, shaking her head. Then she reached up and kissed Bjorn, who had been sneering at Ralph with a look that said, "Yeah, I've been sleeping with your wife, and I'm going to keep doing it." Ralph got up on his knees, covering himself to provide some decency, and looked up at his wife with just the barest hint of tears in his eyes. "Baby, what's going on? You're my wife." She broke from Bjorn's grip and smiled as she looked at her watch. "Not as of 5 minutes ago. I suppose I should say, guess what, dear? We're divorced." Bjorn reached into his jacket and handed her an envelope. She walked over to Ralph with a purposeful, sensuous sway, then ran the envelope up and down both sides of his face. "What are you talking about, baby?" "We're still married," Ralph asked in total confusion. "These are the final divorce papers you signed 10 weeks ago when you thought you were signing my company medical insurance forms. You remember? I was giving you a B job at the time and swallowed your pitiful little load. You know, Ralph, when I swallow Bjorn, I lose half of it out the sides of my mouth. He pumps in about a quart." Ralph looked like he was going to be sick at that revelation. Handing him the envelope, he opened it and read, "April 21st, 12 noon, irreconcilable differences. Pay off, 600,000 ice acceptable, which you retaking from the negative from a man dad says state sale. How cool do you, joint property, Minowex minus husband. You shoot happy to shred property and I trust I couldn't touch it, but hey, I've a lefty out with 600,000 ice acceptable, which you retaking from a man dad says state sale. How cool do you, joint property, Minowex minus husband. You shoot happy to shred property and I trust I couldn't touch it, but hey, I've lefty out with 400,000, so you should consider yourself lucky. "Now do as you're told and transfer it into this account," she said, handing him a piece of paper with a bank account number on it. "You have 20 minutes, or I'll have you arrested for disobeying a court order. It's on page 12. I included it in the document to make sure you cooperate." Ralph stared at the woman he thought he knew until just moments ago. He wanted to say something, anything, but in the end, he looked at the paper in his hands, his shoulders drooping in defeat, and went to the phone to authorize the transfer of funds. As the bank put him on hold, she thought back over the last 18 months and realized how important this move was for her long-term well-being. She had made a discovery in junior high that she had a wonderful effect on guys, even older married ones. All she had to do was dress to show off her body, and she almost always got her way. She also knew it was necessary to be the leader of the pack, and she set out to be the coolest and most popular girl in school. By her sophomore year, she was the reigning queen at her high school until graduation. She smiled as she remembered the way her algebra teacher had always made sure she sat in the front row to get upskirt shots. It probably didn't hurt that she always wore her panties tight and used a tanning salon to keep her skin at a perfect bronze tone. All through high school, she was one of the women every guy wanted to date, although she wouldn't let anyone have their way with her. She was always in control and always on the lookout for a better man, taking any guy she wanted at her whim. So many of those girls whose boyfriend she stole would get so hostile toward her. But hey, she couldn't help it if she was hot and the other girls weren't. Besides, those girls should be thankful that she showed them the flaws in their pitiful little boyfriends. They weren't very faithful after all. Then, in early October of her senior year, a week after she turned 18, she got drunk at a friend's party. She had broken up with her boyfriend, and her friend's father had comforted her as she cried. He even carried her up to his bedroom, since his wife was away with her sick mother, and let her sleep. He made sure everyone else at the party was gone or passed out drunk, and came back up to take care of her. She awoke sometime later, nude on his bed, her body awash with pure passion and Mr. R's face buried between her legs as he pushed her toward probably the best orgasm she had ever had. He was pumping in and out of her swollen box for the second time that night, and she was involved with the father of her best friend. When he was done with her for the night, he helped her clean up and tucked her in bed next to his daughter. For the next 6 weeks, 2 to 3 times a week, Callista allowed that man free access to her body. She learned how to make a man crazy and became very talented in her newly developed oral abilities. She even swallowed. Her mentor taught her to screw in a myriad of positions. Callista had enough ammunition to blackmail the man since she managed to film 3 of their sessions and then cut him off. She demanded he pay her for the trauma he had caused her, or else his wife, family, church, and employer would all find the tape in their possessions. So from December of her senior year in high school until she married Ralph in September after graduating college, he paid her $400 a month, added a sum of over $400 a month, added a sum of over $23,000 for 6 weeks of sex lessons. She remembered being a bit bitter over how her friend's dad had abused her, so she used the next 9 months before she left for college to use and abuse guys in her high school. She also used her body, as well as her new talents, to destroy the girls who had not treated her with the proper respect by taking their boyfriends and sleeping with them, then sending them back to their old girlfriends. She even went so far as to take 3 boyfriends away from her annoying little sister, Stephanie, when she was home from college during her freshman and sophomore years. My God, her sister had moaned, cried, and complained as if her life had ended. Callista had explained to the twerp that Callista was the queen bee and would take what she wanted from whomever she desired. The whole idea of her sister going to bed with her boyfriend crushed Stephanie, but she really had no recourse against her sister. After all, what high school guy wouldn't rather have a 20-year-old college girl with a perfect face and body who puts out than a slightly overweight high school ice queen? Ralph blew her a kiss and yelled that he'd never see her again as they drove off. They smoothly navigated through traffic as they sped away. Ralph sighed, noticing the neighbors staring at him from across the street. He waved back, then picked up the newspaper and went back inside. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He thought even the most deceitful women deserved some sympathy. Ralph checked the clock, then sat down to try to understand what had just happened. After a while, he went upstairs and into the bedroom, feeling disgusted as he looked at the messy sheets from their earlier activities. He stripped the bed of the sheets, tossed a bow at them, and threw the bedspread into the trash. Remaking the bed with a freshly washed set and down comforter, he made sure everything, down to the pillows, was new. He sighed and questioned the situation aloud. I really wonder how long it will take me to put things back in order and have some form of normalcy back in my life. Looking at the phone, he knew he should call Stephanie. He wanted to let her know she didn't need to come over for their twice-weekly meeting tonight, as well as relay to her what had just occurred with Callista. Picking up the phone, he dialed her number. Hi, Steph, it's Ralph. Well, hello. Listen, your sister just left. She handed me a set of final divorce papers and took off with her muscle-headed boyfriend. It's over. I'm so sorry, Ralph. Yeah, listen, I'll come over for a bit, okay? It sounds like you could use some company. Yeah, I think I do need some company. He waited for her to hang up her phone before following suit. He walked downstairs and headed to the kitchen, retrieving a beer. He continued into the living room, still not fully comprehending what had just happened. The emotions he felt were numbing his senses. Sitting in his overstuffed chair, staring into space, he was brought back to the present by a light knock on the front door. Come in, Ralph called out. A young woman in her early 20s peeked around the corner of his living room. She had shoulder-length light brown hair and an almost boyish figure. Granted, she didn't have the perfectly toned body that Callista did, but it actually made her appear smaller than she was. Wearing her trademark polo shirt and jeans, Steph was more in a function than form, unlike her older sibling. She smiled when Ralph said, Hi, little lady. Running over to Ralph, sitting in his chair, she crawled onto his lap and straddled his legs. I'm not little. Besides, Daddy used to say the best things come in small packages. Pressing her hungry mouth down on his, she began to probe his mouth with her tongue. Moving forward in the chair, he stood up and wrapped his arms under her legs to support her and keep her in place as she wrapped her legs around his body. Making their way into the bedroom, he knelt on the bed and gently laid her back while still being held between her legs. Hey, lover, how did you finally get her to take the last step? We've been waiting for this for so long, he asked. Ralph thought about how Stephanie had initially been a sounding board for him and had tried to gently guide Callista back to him. When the final settlement of his parents' estate had come in, he had been surprised to find out they left him over $7 million after paying off all the debts. Even better, $7 million after paying off all the debts. Even better, $6 million was in a blind trust that only he knew about. When Callista suddenly became excited upon learning he was worth close to $1 million, it was pretty clear what she was after, even if she thought he was unaware of her plans. His lawyer had been monitoring court filings in the surrounding counties and found the courthouse where Callista had filed for divorce. His lawyer waited until she played the game with the divorce papers, signing, and quietly had her lawyer investigated. Faced with the problems of a fraudulent legal action that could lead to disbarment, he turned state's evidence, and the police sting went into full action. Callista headed downtown to privately send her money to whatever bank she had set herself up with. Only all his money remained locked up tightly in his accounts, an account he had removed her from a week earlier. With the police listening devices in place in the house, they had picked up the confession about tricking him into signing the papers, as well as her admission to Bjorn about planning the money sting. When Ralph called the bank, he had talked with the police detectives, not the bank manager. Therefore, when Callista walked into the bank in her BL manner, thinking she was now fancy-free, they arrested her on the spot, along with Bjorn. Bjorn would be given a chance for a deal, turn on his lover, and he would get to stay in the USA, being he was a foreign national, or if he stuck with his tight little piece of bomb, he would be deported after his jail time. Callista faced the possibility of jail time and having to sign the actual divorce papers, where Ralph would take on all the bills. She would receive $110,000 for a year of their marriage, which Ralph had kept in an account for her until she was released from jail. However, Thedo Talamount Tudenlib $110,000 for a year of their marriage, which Ralph had kept in an account for her until she was released from jail. However, Thedo Talamount Tudenlib $50,000, not the $600,000 she had hoped for. If she refused this offer, Ralph would sue her, and she would end up with no money from the divorce. This realization was going to devastate Callista. She would soon learn that Ralph was well aware of what was happening in his life and could be tough when necessary. In the end, Ralph would also have Stephanie, her perfect younger sister. Stephanie smiled as she responded, admitting that all she needed was her knowledge of Callista. She knew her sister's strengths and weaknesses and how to use them to her advantage. "Trust me, lover, I understand my older sister inside out. Maybe even better than she understands herself. I've been playing games with her for years, and this time I've won. She used to steal my boyfriends in high school and college just to see me cry. I've known I was in love with you for the last year. When I understood what she was doing to you, I knew I could be yours and you could be mine, and justice be done." "Oh," Ralph whispered as he looked at Stephanie and smiled, recognizing that special look she had that meant she was his for the taking. He couldn't help but smile. He had watched that look in her eyes for almost 14 months as they shared one another, and now they would share it with each other for the rest of their lives. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more.